I'm Dr. Ron Feldman, and we're here today to discuss the beginnings of Pomerado Hospital. I think the presentation should start a couple of years before Pomerado Hospital was built. I want to introduce myself. I'm a gastroenterologist in Escondido, formerly at Pomerado, now just at Palomar. I came here after 2 years at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, by way of the University of Rochester Medical School, the University of Pennsylvania, and fellowship in GI at UCSD, which I completed in 1975. And I think at this point it would be good to have the other two people, one of whom I shared an office with at the very beginning, 1975, Richard Just and Alan Schoengold. Just introduce yourselves.
I'm Richard Just. I'm a hematologist and medical oncologist. I matriculated here from Chicago via the University of Michigan for undergraduate school, Chicago Medical School, and UCLA, Wadsworth, VA, where I did my internship and residency in internal medicine. And I completed my fellowship at UCSD at the same time as Dr. Feldman did.
Okay, I'm Alan Schoengold. I'm a general internist that started my professional career in New York. I went to State University of New York at downstate, and then after a year in Pennsylvania, I was in the Air Force for 2 years. Following my tour of duty, I came out here to San Diego and did my last year of internal medicine training at Mercy Hospital, where I met David Russo, and we decided we were going to start our practices in internal medicine together in Rancho Bernardo, despite all of our professors at Mercy telling us the better opportunities were downtown San Diego. We both just seemed to like Rancho Bernardo, and believe it or not, there were still cows grazing on the pastures alongside 163. There was no 15. And it seemed like just a great opportunity to be in a nice country setting and community. So,
well, thank you. For me, the journey to Pomerado Hospital was sort of convoluted in the sense that I was going to join a group in La Jolla, but they offered me a salary I could clearly turn down. And I got a call from somebody, perhaps Dr. Willis Irwin, who was a pathologist at Sharp, I think, somewhere in San Diego, who was having a meeting of some younger physicians to try to build a medical building in Poway, California, a place I'd never been, even though I'd been in San Diego for a couple of years. So I went to the meeting. Dave, I don't know, you might have been there. And it was really interesting. It turned out that Willis Irwin and his brother, who was a general practitioner in the Poway area, had bought some property on Pomerado Road, and they were pretty sure a hospital would be built next to it. So they convinced us, and we were all in our early 30s, not exactly businessmen, to consider entering a partnership to build a complex of medical buildings, which became Pomerado Medical, Dental, and other names, next to where this hospital would be built. But there was no assurance there would ever be a hospital there. And Alan and I were talking a little while ago about what the politics of building the hospital, and neither of us really, and probably Rich either, knew what was going on in the background with the board of directors of the district and anything else. And I still don't know.
But we do have a little bit of history from Dave Russo's wife, the former Ann Hoyer, now Ann Hoyer Russo, regarding how that all started. So if you want me to chip in a little bit, Dr. Hoyer was one of the former chiefs of staff at Palomar Hospital, and he was very instrumental in getting the district to consider developing another hospital in the southern tier of the district. And I think that another physician in the community who actually was a patient of mine, who passed away in his late 90s, David Littauer, was also very instrumental in working in Rancho Bernardo to achieve the same goal. It was something that those of us in our early 30s really knew very little about. We just liked the area. We thought it was pretty cool. We liked the idea of having a medical center that we were all part of putting together, but didn't realize how many physicians and other people in the community were so adamant about having their own hospital down here.
Well, I got involved with this project actually in concert with Ron and another fellow who was completed a fellowship at UCSD in nephrology named Lenny Oken, who never really joined us at the last minute. He went out on his own, and it was Ron and I who opened up an office in Poway, which I'll get to in a minute. But as far as the politics is concerned, as Ron said, we had no assurances that this building would be built or that Pomerado Hospital would be built. And so we contacted, I believe it was Mr. McLeod, who agreed to meet with us at Hope Architects. And we saw the drawings and were duly impressed. And at that time they were planning on 2 towers because the projections were that the population in the southern tier, so to speak, was going to grow so fast that it would soon take over as the predominant hospital in the area, and that Palomar would be a satellite hospital eventually. That's what we were told. When we went to a special meeting, when we actually started our practice, a few days later there was a big meeting at Palomar Hospital in Graybill Auditorium where the entire medical staff was in an uproar about Pomerado Hospital. Why did we need another hospital in the community? And both of these hospitals would be way off of the freeway, where trauma cases, would have a difficult time getting to the hospitals in a prompt manner and blah, blah, blah. And by the way, the freeway wasn't built at that time. So you had to go through the back streets and smaller roads. Mr. McLeod got up in front of this group and said, I don't know what the big hullabaloo is about all this. Pomerado Hospital is never going to be any more than a satellite to Palomar. And I remember Ron and I looking at each other and saying, didn't we hear that same guy say
The opposite.
the opposite, like a few weeks ago?
Right.
So we knew we were in for a struggle,
Well, politically, there was a lot going on there were a lot of retired businessmen in Rancho Bernardo, admirals, generals, other people who wanted their own hospital. And
Right.
at the time, if you look back on this controversy about which hospital would be dominant or why would they build another hospital, I had a pretty good perspective on that when I went to a department heads meeting before when Palomar West was being planned. And I said, I think missed an opportunity to consolidate in one hospital in the late 1970s. And now you have an opportunity, rather than building Palomar West, to build one facility, sell Pomerado, and consolidate down near North County Fair, right next to the freeway, and not have people running all over the county in this district. Well, obviously, that didn't fly. But nonetheless, I was very much for Pomerado Hospital when it was being built. That's for selfish reasons, I guess. Yes, Len.
Wasn't there also something about Sharp trying to move into that area and a feeling that the district better do something?
Yes, and that's still today. Kaiser's going to move in, Sharp's going to move in, Scripps is going to move in, Mayo Clinic's going to move in. And yet, it seems to me, in the northeast part of the county, this pretty much has a lock on anything that's going on. Not a lot of people are going to move. Anyway, I just had a chance to revisit that original argument where I was clearly on the side of building Pomerado because we were building a medical building next to this field that became Pomerado Hospital. And now I can see both points of view. Well, anyway, Rich mentioned we went out, we started to plan the building, and then Rich and I went out to Pomerado, to Midland Road in Poway, which had a hitching, but our building had a horse hitching post. I came from a couple of big cities.
Just interrupt for a second.
Sure.
That was the only medical office space in Poway. And it was on Midland Road, just north of Poway Road. And it was it was the longest distance you could think of to get to Palomar, which I'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah. And let me add that when David Russo and I started working together in early '75, David had been up here for probably 6 months before I joined him.
74.
Yeah, he wasn't busy enough until early '75. We were working at the Pomerado Medical Dental Center in Rancho Bernardo, up on the hill, West Bernardo Drive. When we got involved, at the invitation of Ron and Rich and some others, to get involved in the building of Pomerado Medical Dental Center, Pomerado Road was a dirt road, and we thought they were crazy, actually, but this was a general partnership of a bunch of young physicians, a couple of more senior guys with some experience like Irwin, but it was really going out on a limb. You looked at Pomerado, and it was about maybe a quarter of a mile of dirt road before it became paved again, and a big open field. And we were going to dig a hole in the ground and put a medical building up, and we had faith that there would be a hospital next door. Now, quite a few years later, we're all trying to figure out how to keep it going.
Right.
Through the politics of the competition. This is a unique area of San Diego, and despite the fact that it's within the district of Palomar, Pomerado, unfortunately, it's such a prime site that not only did Kaiser and Sharp Steely and Scripps Clinic take an intense interest, but virtually every organization that delivers healthcare wanted a piece of the action. It has, for the last 35 plus years, cost Pomerado about 50% of its population going elsewhere. And that's been a challenge for us for all of our careers.
And also at Palomar, I mean the district as well. Well, I think you can see the picture of what we were dealing with. A bunch of fields with rattlesnakes and coyotes in them, a promise that there might be a hospital there, a bunch of young people borrowing money from their parents to try to get this building going, with one older guy, Willis Irwin, who was very smart. Well, his brother died tragically. His mobile home or whatever it was fell on him when he was trying to change a tire. And we went on, and I think we should pick this up because Pomerado obviously was built at the point where it was built, and talk about how it was to start a new hospital, and which was very exciting for all of us. And go on, talk about some of the things that happened back in the 70s. So who wants to kick that off?
Well, I can start off. When Pomerado opened in 1977, it was considered a state-of-the-art hospital. It was as close to earthquake-proof as a hospital could be. It's made up of several different individual buildings that are linked together, and if you walk the floors of Pomerado, you'll find these joints in the hallways, which make up the connections between buildings. It's sitting on some sort of Teflon padding that allows each building to move independently in an earthquake. And in fact, it's probably the most earthquake-safe building that was built in the 70s. I believe with the latest standards in California, it doesn't need much, if any, upgrading to continue to meet standards for hospitals. Ron was he just reminded me earlier, the first chairman of medicine at this hospital. Our first chief of staff was Bill Cusenberry, followed by Tony Eason, the general surgeon, and then myself. And I can tell you that I was very young when I was chief of staff. I was probably not even 35 years old yet. Very wet behind the ears, had a lot of what I would consider in retrospect arrogance of a young New York trained internist who believed that he knew better than most other docs who had been in practice 20 or 30 years. And I shared this with a group at a luncheon a couple of months ago. I remember going to a board meeting at Palomar in the Graybill Auditorium, and we were trying to get a CAT scanner for Pomerado. And I, in my infinite wisdom, reminded the board that the medical staff of Pomerado was a more youthful, aggressive group of physicians that very much needed this piece of equipment. I don't think to this day I've lived down the effects that had, the ripple effects. I recall later that week, Lee Human, the ultimate gentleman, came up to me on rounds at Pomerado and put his arm around me and said, "You realize what a blunder that was?" And,
well, for one thing, I remember, they posted the comments, and Dave Grambort, one of the surgeons, also made comments saying that we're much better trained than the surgeons at Palomar, Bob Craig, Greer, and the rest, and we have much better equipment, modern techniques, and that just piled on to what you were saying. It caused a tremendous amount of consternation up there. And now, of course, we're the older group. So it was an incredible staff, and I thought that we stayed on the cutting edge in terms of developing methods of. We started a committee called the Performance Evaluation Committee, which I chaired for a number of years. And this was something new where medical staffs were demanding that there were standards for their physicians on staff, and both Palomar and Pomerado were doing this. And so I had the responsibility down here at Pomerado. And I was very proud of the staff that we had. And only on a rare occasion did I find myself having to sit down with a physician and ask him if he wouldn't mind signing off a case so that he might avoid some courtroom time. But it was, for the most part, a very satisfying area of responsibility on the staff, and I guess that's where I'll leave it.
I'd like to go back a little bit because putting it in the perspective, as I was thinking about this session today, when we came up to join Palomar Pomerado, which was only Palomar at the time, they had just recently come out of a, shall we say, the Middle Ages, because they were, the new tower had recently been built. And right after that new tower, there was an influx of these young Turks like me and Alan and Ron, who joined the staff at the same time. And so we were all filled with this enthusiasm, that something new could be created in the inland North County. And we would be instrumental in doing that. I recall that when the first day we opened practice, Ron and I sat down in our office on Midland Road, and he had brought a deck of cards. And he said, "Okay, let's, we had nothing to do, we're sitting there." And then my first patient walked through the door, and this old lady from Boston, had this thick Boston accent, said, "Is there an internist in here?" You know, so Feldman pointed to me. I pointed to Feldman, and I got the short straw. So I said, "Yeah, you know, I'll take care of you." And it turned out that she became one of my loyal patients for many, many, many years. And she really was going to see the dentist next door, and he wouldn't treat her until she had her hypertension controlled. So I was elected. Later that day, Ron said, let's go up to Palomar and, you know, just say hello and introduce ourselves. And he had met some certain people. So I of course, went along with him. Got up there, and we were stopped by a Jeff Granite, who was a cardiologist on the staff at that time, and he said, "Oh, you're a hematologist?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "I got a patient. Can you do a bone marrow on this patient, you know?" So I said, "Well, sure." You know, I didn't think it would amount to anything. So I went over and examined the patient. Then I called up Central Supply to order the bone marrow tray. So I said, they said to me, "Well, we don't stock them." I said, "You don't stock bone marrow trays?" So, how come? Well, there's one hematologist oncologist in the community, and it was Bill Allgood. And he worked across the street at Palomar Medical Group. And he brought his own equipment so that they didn't feel that they had to stock anything. So I had to hop in the car, go in the pre-freeway days all the way to the other side of Poway, get the one tray that I had, the one piece of equipment, haul it back to Palomar. And, you know, who knew anything about how do I submit a bill for this, you know, type of thing, you know? I mean, I didn't know anything about it. That's how new we were in the community. Well, of course, when Pomerado opened, you know, we at that time had state-of-the-art facilities, with the exception of some things that we had to get, like the CT scanner and so forth, which were new at that time. But it was a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, and in my specialty, gastroenterology, I had gone to Ted Kleider, the administrator at Palomar, and said, "We need endoscopy equipment in this hospital." "What's that?" "Well, you know, colonoscopy, what's that? Upper endoscopy, what's that?" So you want equipment, buy it yourself. So I did. I had to buy a gastroscope, a colonoscope, a light source. I lugged everything around, remember? They wouldn't buy it. So a couple of years later, they decided to buy it from me. But that was sort of the state of the art of the equipment.
What year was that going on? What year were you talking about?
I'm talking about 75, 76,
okay,
before
right.
Pomerado was built.
Yeah, understood.
So that just related to his not having any bone marrow equipment, you know. That was a big undertaking for me to buy endoscopy equipment, let me tell you.
We had, both Dave Russo and I did a lot of work with patients who had heart attacks and congestive failure, and one of my passions was cardiac rehab, and Palomar Health didn't have any cardiac rehab, so we had an exercise physiologist working for us, and we started a program on the campus of Pomerado Hospital on the southwest corner of the big open field, and we basically put in a little track, walking track, and had our exercise physiologist and one of us out there 3 mornings a week, and we had people who had heart attacks come out and develop some strength and conditioning following their heart attacks. And it was only years later that Palomar instituted the same kind of a program, and eventually took over the program we had at Pomerado as well. But it was just one of those things that we found there was a need, and like the bone marrow tray and the endoscopy equipment, it wasn't there yet, so we decided to bring it.
And the same is true of the bylaws, rules, and regulation of the hospital. We didn't have any.
Right.
And you know, later I used to complain that Pomerado had so many more rules than Palomar had. a lot of which I had said something to do with. But when I look at the environment today in 2013, the regulatory environment, that was nothing. But it seemed very complicated, and the people at Palomar said we were overcomplicating things, and and they, maybe they were right. Well, I remember a few things that happened early on. First of all, I think everybody was very enthusiastic about having the community and us. Dave parlayed it into having a general invite comp us at Rancho Santa Fe Golf Club, where I made an eagle on the 10th hole, and thank you for that. But a few things I remember. It was very strange. First of all, we started one morning in surgery. The anesthesiologist went into the operating room. There was a coyote in there. And secondly, when the back door was left open, rattlesnakes came into the hospital. And one guy driving a truck was bitten by a rattlesnake, got in his truck, and he was holding it, came into the emergency room, strangling this thing. Another sort of funny thing was we had a very big gastroenterologist at Pomerado, weighed about 375 pounds,
At least.
and it was his birthday. And our endoscopy unit was right next to the emergency room. So the nurses hired somebody in a bear outfit to come in with balloons and for his birthday and sing happy birthday, except they got it wrong. And into the waiting room of the hospital came a girl in a bikini carrying balloons, singing happy birthday to Big Howard. So that, a couple of funny things I remember. We had an anesthesiologist, Catherine Shepard, who had a couple of kids, little babies, and carried them around into the operating room.
Right.
On her backpack. It's a little more informal than it is now. The Joint Commission wasn't quite as tough as
Well, not exactly,
Yeah, right. Well, what else do you guys remember about
Well,
Pomerado?
one funny thing, as you were talking about, humorous episodes that I remember was in the ICU. There was a patient who had a chest tube placed, and he became belligerent and confused and so forth, and wanted to check out of the hospital. And so the nurses were trying to restrain him, and so forth and so on, but he broke free, and he ended up on Pomerado Road, running down with his gown and the chest tube hanging out, going down the street. The cops finally rescued him and brought him back. So that was one humorous thing that I recall. It turned out okay, fortunately. Could have been a big tragedy. As far as my practice was concerned, I got extremely busy in Escondido, and was spending more and more of my time in Escondido than in Poway. And more recently, I was trying to, since I've been in this community for so long, and I like to think I have a good reputation, I didn't want to just move completely up to Escondido and cut my ties down here. So I joined a group which we now call C-Care, which is an amalgamation of 3 different practice groups. And we have 5 treatment centers, all the way from La Jolla to Encinitas to Vista, Escondido, and Poway. And I tried to convince one of my partners, Steve Eisenberg, to take over in Pomerado, and let's keep the practice going. And yeah, never did anything about it. So finally, more recently, I convinced him that his future is here. It's not so much in Escondido. I mean, Escondido, we're pretty well entrenched, shall we say. But so recently we've put up a new facility in Forest Ranch, and he's down there primarily, and that's good because, as I think the others have alluded to, this is really a prime area. The population has grown tremendously. The inland North County, all along the I-15 corridor, has the highest incidence of cancer in the county. And you know, it's amazing how many patients we see a day. You know, it's unfortunate. I'd like to be able to not practice anymore. You know, and that would imply that we've cured the disease. But it seems to be getting more and more common and prevalent.
I think we only have a few minutes left. So, does anyone in the
Question, what led up to the decision to merge the two entities? Any circumstances that, and what year too? I'm sort of the time clock here. I need to know the years and dates and so on. If you could remember.
merged Palomar, Pomerado?
Yeah.
Well, they're the same district, and I don't think there's a...
It's all one district.
Oh, one district. Oh,
It's all
I
one
get it.
district.
It's
Okay.
always been
Yeah.
one
the branch
district.
It's part of the same
Just two
hospital.
hospitals.
It's always
Yeah,
been that way.
yeah.
It's been that way all along.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good.
It's now Palomar Health.
Now I understand.
Pomerado's not in the name anymore.
No.
All right.
They spent a lot of money making it Palomar Pomerado Health System, then dropping the S, and then dropping the H. I mean, dropping the Pomerado. I don't have any idea why,
Yeah.
but it's all one hospital.
So it's like Tri-City and Grossmont, in other words.
Yeah,
They're
it's
same
one
district.
district.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other?
Yeah, one piece of, we'll go back to a little ancient history that I just wanted to share was after Dr. Just and Dr. Goldman decided they didn't want an office with a hitching post out front and moved
We didn't know how to ride.
Right, we didn't have saddles.
I was allergic.
Right. So they decided to move into the Pomerado Medical Dental Center, and I think Dave Rousseau and I have vivid memories of Rich Just's mother-in-law decorating the office.
No, my mother-in-law.
Oh, is it your mother-in-law? I'm sorry, it was Ron Philbin's mother-in-law.
His mother-in-law.
That's right.
Jamie's mother.
And her Chicago Tribune husband, who was 15 years younger than her, and he drank a lot. He didn't know how old she was. That's true.
It was a nightmare. I remember we lived in the office for a number of years with the most, how should I say, horrific wallpaper the world has ever seen. This bright, vibrant orange color that would make anyone ill more ill. And people would come in the office and say, who picked this wallpaper? and you know, the four of us had no clue what was coming. You know, we had no idea. But it was an interesting time. One of the just a memory that I have is I think that Pomerado was the first hospital in San Diego that elected to have a skilled nursing facility attached to the hospital itself, which was really somewhat cutting edge at the time. It enabled the skilled nursing facility to take care of sicker patients, people who normally you might be a little reluctant to put into a skilled nursing facility, where they could shuttle back and forth if the need arose. So Villa Pomerado, I think, was built in the 80s. I'm not sure exactly, mid or late 80s. And Dave Rousseau and I spent quite a bit of time rounding at Villa Pomerado as well as Pomerado Hospital. So we have fond memories of Pomerado, and hope to see it continue well into the future, although the competition in this community, as intense as it is, it will never develop into what was originally projected as the dominant hospital in this region. Just not going to happen.
So, are there any other questions for the audience? Well, you know, it's been interesting revisiting a lot of this. Certainly, when I started at Palomar, there were no emergency room doctors. Remember, Lynn?
Yeah.
The local doctors like Lynn just came to the hospital if there was an emergency and then added people to their practices. There were no uninsured people. There were so many things that were different. There were no DRGs and a million other other things. Life
No
life
extra
didn't
house.
seem that simple then, and practice didn't seem that simple. There were always challenges, but compared to today, it was a great time to start out and, you know, spread our wings a little bit, and times change. So I think, do you have any other final comments you want to make? Either of you? No, I think that.
Hey, thanks, the three of you are very congenial. This is the best interaction we've had. Really.
Well, you know, it's not always that way.
Okay.